Они же на стороне войны. И даже тогда, когда они пытаются якобы внести какие-то изменения в предложение Трампа, мы же это отчетливо видим. Все эти изменения направлены только на одно. На то, чтобы вообще заблокировать весь этот мирный процесс. Выдвинуть такие требования, которые для России являются абсолютно неприемлемыми. Они это понимают. И тем самым свалить потом на Россию сворачивание этого мирного процесса. Вот в чем их цель. Мы это отчетливо видим. Мы не собираемся воевать с Европой, я уже об этом 100 раз сказал. Но если Европа вдруг захочет с нами воевать и начнет, мы готовы прямо сейчас. С Украиной мы там действуем хирургическим способом, аккуратненько, так, чтобы, понятно, да, это не война в прямом современном смысле этого слова. Если Европа вдруг захочет начать с нами войну и начнет ее, то очень быстро произойти ситуация, при которой нам не с кем будет договариваться.
This is Revelation chapter 11 and verse 14. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Quadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. I want to go into a lesson based on the clip that you just saw of Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, and his discourse about the peace talks between them and Ukraine failing, and basically implementing or implicating that the Europeans were behind it because they want war. All right. And ultimately, we know, according to prophecy, that the Lord wants this war. All right. And that this war cannot be prevented. All right. Real quick, before I move on, this is Joel chapter 3 and verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. And this is the time that we're coming into. All right. This is why, Putin is basically being pushed. He's and this alludes to Ezekiel the 38th chapter. Because he's being pushed into a corner, so to speak, where he's going to have to fight. While you do have the Europeans gassing it up, because they gassed Ukraine into going into a war that they knew that they would not win. They basically said, we'll give you the guns, but you got to die for it. And it was all for the purpose of, quote unquote, weakening Russia. Well, now you got Ukraine. Their population of men is basically decimated. And they're pretty much on the losing end of this battle. The peace talk was really to salvage whatever was left. But again, going back to the point through the Spirit that ultimately the Lord, as the scripture says, putting hooks in the jaws, all right, of the Russians, bringing them back into that Cold War spirit. Because when you think about a hook being put in the jaws of a fish, it forces the fish to go in the opposite direction. Whether it's up or whether it's back. It's against its own will. And all of these conversations I've noticed personally, is that, Putin's trying to, be sensible about it, rational about it. But basically he's being put into a corner. Ukraine was a perfect example of that when he kept saying, look, no more, don't cross the red line. And there's a whole history on the Ukrainian conflict, the East versus the West concerning Russia versus the USA. And you can go and do a lot of research on it. But throughout that history, what I've noticed is that there was always this level of restraint from the Russians to try and calm the situation down. But ultimately, it's the Lord putting hooks in their jaws. All right, so this is Ezekiel 38 and 1. It says, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now, we go into this often, the Russians, this is referring to the Russians. Now, you may ask, aren't the Russians Edomites, the so-called white man? Why would the Lord be referencing the Japhetic line in this chapter? And it's because they now occupy the land that Japheth, originally inhabited. All right, that's why when you go through these Gog, these are names of the members of the Japhetic family. The so-called white man is not from the Japhetic line. He's a Shemite, but he's a Hebrew Edomite. All right, so I just wanted to go into that to show that this is referencing the Russians because they occupy the land of Japheth. Even though they're so-called white people or their biblical nationality is Edom, they're still being referenced as Gog. All right, so let's continue at verse 3. It says, "And say, Thus saith the Lord God, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth in all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomar and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them." Now see, in verse 4 it said again, the Lord will turn thee back, right? Going into the hook, the analogy of the hook. The Russians had their own idea, and then the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. And that's one thing I noticed about this basically this press conference that Putin was in, where you can see it from a spiritual perspective. The Lord is really just turning them back into that Cold War spirit, where they've tried to have discourse and peace talks, and Russia's not your enemy. They've tried to do all of these different things to de-escalate the situation, but ultimately the Lord put hooks in their jaws. Just like the Lord is putting the spirit on the West to stoke up and provocate this war, because ultimately it's going to play out. And there are some Bible scholars that understand that this is in reference to the Russians. All right, real quick, I just want to get the David Guzik commentary, and I'm just going to jump down to the point. All right, so at part A it says, "Set your face against Gog of the land of Magog." In general context of God's restoration of Israel, here Ezekiel prophesied against Gog, a ruler, and Magog, the place of Gog. Here Gog is noted as the prince of Rush, Meshech, and Tubal. All right, now jumping down, it says the phrase prince of Rush has also been translated as chief prince, with the idea that the word Rush describes the greatness of the prince, not a place where the prince rules. Translators and interpreters do not agree if it should be prince of Rush or chief prince. Now here's the point. It says, if Rush is understood as a name of a people or place, it has no other connection or reference in the Old Testament. There are many who think that Rush speaks of Russia or the Russians, but the only direct evidence of this is similar sound of the names. All right. And again, it is referring to Russia. All right. And we know this through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. All right, so what we see playing out, all right, is the Lord really sharpening up the Russians for this war. One thing Putin also mentioned was how they were very surgical and intentional with how they handled the war with the Ukrainians. Meaning if they didn't have to take a life, if they could just take you prisoner, they were exercising that right. They didn't try to destroy population centers. Like it wasn't a war of absolution, where it didn't start that way. Now it's turning more into that, but it didn't start that way, meaning they were very intentional about the casualties. They were very intentional about how the Ukrainian civilians would look at the war, so they tried at every corner to preserve life as much as possible, because again, it is a war. And this is what he meant by we were surgical. And what that alludes to when I think about that is that the Lord is really utilizing this war to instill a certain type of coldness in the spirit of the Russians for this war that they're about to fight with the West. Because if they were surgical against their brethren, because the Ukrainians are really, their brethren. Russia and Ukraine, they're not that much different. All right, so if they were this surgical and careful, they're not going to have the same attention to detail, so to speak, when it comes to the West. And the greatest thing you can give an army is experience. It's not training as much as it is experience, because training can fall through in real time. But you've had the Russians for years now in this conflict with Ukraine improve. They've been able to get better because they're seeing what works and what doesn't work through the casualty rate. So you're getting real-time information on what actually works, not just because a lot of training is theory. Yeah, all things being considered, this should work in war. All right, and this takes me back to Joel, the 3rd chapter, because what did the Lord say to the Gentiles? Matter of fact, let me get this in the NLT, because it really brings it out and highlights it even more. This Joel 3:9, it says, "Say to the nations far and wide, get ready for war. Call out your best warriors. Let all your fighting men advance for the attack. Hammer your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Train even your weaklings to be warriors." So this is what we see happening in real time, even when you deal with the Ukrainian conflict. What a lot of people don't realize, and it's because we live in a society that's so far removed from war, is certain things you just don't think about. One of those things is the idea of how quickly modern warfare chews through men. And what I mean by that is the most well-trained soldiers for the Ukrainians, a lot of them died in the first wave because they were the first responders, so to speak. They were the first ones to respond to the incident, to the conflict. After a while, the average age of the Ukrainian fighting force was around 40, 41. And why is this? Because if you're dealing with logistics of war, you don't want to give up all your young men, because you have to have the young men to replace the men that you've lost in the war. So you don't go young men first. So the average soldier's age in at least a year ago, I want to say, was a 41. I don't know where it is now, but it was the 41. All right. And that's because you give away the middle aged and the older men who are still able to fight. You give them to the war and to the front line because you're assuming they've already had children. You want to preserve your younger ones. Well, now the Ukrainians are getting to a point where they have to consider bringing the younger men into the war. And there was a big conflict between the Ukrainians' court, or however their judicial system is set up, because on one end, you still need a fighting force. On the other end, if they get decimated, you have no men to replace the population. So then you're fighting a losing war one way or the other. Now, when you look at this, it says, train your weaklings, even your weaklings to be warriors. It kind of reminds me of this type of incident. Not saying that that's the complete breakdown. I'm just saying that, we're in a time where they're going to have to train up even the weaklings. They're going to have to train up these streamers. They're going to have to train up these guys that's been on Twitch and playing video games all day. They're going to have to train them up because in modern warfare, when you deal with drone conflicts, missiles, you chew through men so much so quickly that there is no other alternative but to train even your weaklings. And this shows you that this is all prophecy in motion. See, most people looked at what was being said concerning World War III, concerning the possibility of sedition, as things that were far-fetched. But now we're getting closer to that hour, and these things are no longer a laughing matter. All right, this is Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 5. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. And see, now we're living in that time where this is playing out in real time. And the Ukraine-Russia conflict was one of the greatest examples of modern warfare, because both of those armies are relatively organized. They're standing armies. The Afghanistan situation was basically a standing army against guerrilla warfare. It's not the same. And one thing this conflict showed was that you run through men very quickly. All right. I want to get this. This is 2nd Esdras, chapter 16 and verse 33. The virgins shall mourn, having no bridegrooms. The women shall mourn, having no husbands. Their daughters shall mourn, having no helpers. In the wars shall their bridegrooms be destroyed, and their husbands shall perish of famine. And this is playing out in real time. If you just look at the Ukrainian population, if you just do a quick Google search of what has the war done to the Ukrainian population, you'll see how quickly these type of warfares chew through men. And ultimately, it's the Lord. The Lord is using this, all right, as a means of judgment. And people forget this in Exodus 15. That's why they act so shocked when brothers bring out certain scriptures of war. And this is Exodus 15 and 3. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. So the Lord is considered a man of war, meaning a power of war, meaning he's war. The Lord has a mindset for war. Where do you think the strategists get it from? They get it from the source. The source has a mindset for war. And what is he doing right now? He's preparing for war against his enemies. And the Lord's tools are very different from human tools. The Lord can use famine, pestilence, the teeth of wild beasts, storms, tempests, destroying crops with the weather. The Lord has all of these tools, and he's really about to hyper-focus all these tools against the wicked. You know, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man first and foremost. And one of the tools that he's going to use against the so-called white man is the so-called white man. Evil destroys even itself. And the Lord is using this to wage war on the planet. All right. And this is what, I, through the Spirit love to bring out, that ultimately it goes back to the source, which is Yahweh Shem Shai. All right. This is the controversy that the Lord has with the world. All right. 2/3 of our people and the heathens. And the elect are going to be saved according to the Lord's mercy, not according to anything that they've done. All right. This is Isaiah 34 and 1. Come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. And this is the pieces being moved for a very serious conflict. The Lord is not playing. And that's why I love looking at certain things involving the war, and particularly Putin and how he speaks about the war, because you can tell that it's not his mindset. It's the Lord pulling the strings. Because you'll hear him, no matter what the U.S. say, the West will say, look, he's a madman. He's trying to, do the recreate the Soviet Union. He's going to invade Europe. And then you hear this man talking. And he's like, man, y'all done broke every agreement we done had with y'all. And now, you done broke the straw that broke the camel's back, which ran them into the Ukrainian conflict. They tried to deal with dialogue, but ultimately the Lord put hooks in his jaws. The Lord is drawing them back. And that's why, again, this always goes back to the will of Yahweh Shem Shai. Because that's who's behind it. That's who's actually doing it. It's not the men themselves. The men themselves are just tools. All right, this is Proverbs 21 and 1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. And the Lord is turning the mind of the leaders of the world today into war. That is the reality. All right. That is where the world is headed. And the Lord set up the prophets to say, look, this is signed sincerely, Yahweh Shem Shai. The war that's about to happen isn't because Putin is a madman. It's because the Lord wants war. And we read it in Joel, the 3rd chapter. What did the Lord say plainly? Tell this to the Gentiles, the heathens. Prepare war, man. Prepare war. And that's exactly what's happening against some of these so-called leaders, their own interests. Because you can clearly see in this video, he's trying to rationalize, like, all right, they basically trying to drag us into war. We showing up for the peace talk and they done sabotaged it. If you was a madman like that, you wouldn't even waste time going to a peace talk. That's taking time away from strategizing on how to annihilate you, which shows you they're conflicted in their spirit. But as the scriptures say, whoever resisted his will, man, nobody. You know, and that's what the prophets are set up to do. Lord willing, we be a part of that number. But our apostles and elders have been speaking on this for years before we actually started living it. And look at the world today. You cannot deny the Lord is moving in the earth. This cannot be denied, man. All right. You have to be completely dumb and docile, blind to not see what's going on. This is Psalms 9:16. The Lord is known by the judgment which he executed. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. And the Lord has put the spirit on the West to provoke these Russians to a point where you're not going to need to poke the bear anymore. It's going to be stirred up and ready. All right. This is why in Isaiah the 13th chapter, it says this about the Medes. All right. Isaiah chapter 13. Let me jump down and get it. Verse 17, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb, and their eye shall not spare children. This is imagine the Russians turned up even more, because that's all this war is doing actively. As we speak, you have Russians that have been in knife wars. You can look at drone and POV footage of what they're going through. What do you think that's doing to the mind of the men that's on the ground? It's hardening them. And that's why, I say, personally, as a man, that the greatest thing you can give an army is real life experience. They know what works in war, because they're living it. It's not a lot of training is theory. When was the last time the United States had to go against an active standing army? Which shows you that a lot of training is just theory. A lot of this drone warfare came out of necessity because they were in the middle of the battle, and this was the most convenient tool in trench warfare. Nobody else had that theory before the war happened. And it's just an example that the experience is ultimately the best teacher. And the Lord is using all of this to push the world into war so that people will be judged through it, man. All right. Real quick, this is Isaiah 9:5. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. Which shows you thousands of years ago, the Lord spoke of modern warfare as we know it today. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying. With that, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.